splash was louder than the screams. Ice water poured down her face, dripping from her curls, soaking into the carpet. The kind of sound that makes a whole room stop breathing. Every guest in the Grand Crest Hotel lobby froze. The woman didn't flinch. She just stared at the man in front of her. The manager, her eyes steady, hurt, burning with disbelief. He smirked. "Maybe now you'll learn some manners." His tone was sharp, cold, like the water sliding down her cheek. The silence that followed was unbearable, a silence thick with guilt, shame, and the quiet tremor of anger no one dared to show. Then, the revolving doors spun open. A tall man in a charcoal suit walked in, confident, calm, but there was a storm behind his eyes. He saw his wife, saw her trembling hand, the wet dress, the broken pride. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. His gaze locked on the manager. "Did you just throw water on my wife?" His voice was low, steady, dangerous. The staff looked away. The lobby air shifted, heavy, electric, because everyone knew what was about to happen next, and no one was ready to see it. The lobby still felt heavy, the kind of silence that hums in the air after a thunderclap. The manager stood frozen behind the counter, eyes darting toward the guests, pretending not to stare. He could feel it, the weight of every camera phone discreetly recording, the whispers slipping through the air like smoke. But the only person who mattered was the man now standing just a few feet away, Adrian Cole. The name alone could make boardrooms fall silent. CEO of the Grand Crest International chain, the very company whose name glimmered in gold above the lobby doors. And the woman standing beside him, still dripping with ice water and dignity, was his wife, Dr. Naomi Cole, a professor, speaker, and the quiet force behind every success he'd ever had. The manager's throat went dry. He tried to speak, to stutter out some excuse, but Adrian lifted a hand. Just one gesture, and the whole lobby seemed to hold its breath again. "Before you say a word," Adrian said softly, "tell me, was this about service or skin color?" His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. The quiet authority in it was sharper than any shout. Naomi placed a gentle hand on her husband's arm. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice steady but trembling underneath. "Let's not do this here," but he didn't move. His eyes never left the manager. "Here is exactly where this needs to happen." Around them, the staff exchanged nervous glances. Some looked ashamed. Others looked terrified. The front desk clerk slowly turned the hotel phone toward himself, ready to dial HR or maybe security, though he wasn't sure for whom. The manager finally found his voice. "Sir, I didn't know. You didn't know she was my wife?" Adrian interrupted, taking a step closer. "Or you didn't know basic decency?" Every word landed like a hammer, deliberate, measured, and echoing across the marble floors. The guests stayed still, too captivated, too horrified to look away. For the first time, the Grand Crest's gleaming perfection cracked. Behind the polished floors, the glass chandeliers and the scripted smiles, something real, raw, human, and ugly was finally showing, and no one could unsee it now. The hum of the lobby had turned into a low, uneasy whisper, like the sound of a room that didn't know whether to breathe or hide. Adrian's calm stillness was more terrifying than any outburst. He didn't raise his voice, didn't even take a step closer. He just looked, and the manager, Brian, could feel that gaze cutting deeper than any reprimand. Naomi stood beside her husband, still dripping from the cold water, her hand trembling slightly, though she tried to steady it against her purse. She wasn't crying. She refused to give him, or anyone, the satisfaction of seeing her break. But her silence spoke louder than anything else. Brian swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Sir, I thought she was being disrespectful to what?" Adrian's voice cut through the air, calm but sharp. "To you." The manager hesitated, glancing at the employees gathering quietly around the edges of the lobby. The receptionists, the concierge, even a bellboy who'd frozen halfway to the elevator with someone's luggage. Everyone was pretending to work, but every eye was fixed on the scene unfolding in the middle of the marble floor. "Mr. Cole," Brian said finally, his voice shaking slightly. "I didn't know who she was." Adrian tilted his head. You didn't have to know who she was. You just had to know she's a human being. The sentence dropped like thunder. A woman behind the front desk pressed a hand over her mouth. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Naomi closed her eyes, took a slow breath. "Adrian," she said softly, trying to pull him back from the edge she could see forming in his eyes. "Please, let's just go." He turned to her for the first time since he'd walked in. His expression softened just a little. But behind it, a storm still brewed. "Go and let this stand. Naomi, you were humiliated in my hotel." Her lips parted, but she didn't argue. The word might carried weight. She'd forgotten in that moment of chaos that this place, this luxury, this empire, bore her husband's name. Adrian turned to the nearest staff member. "Get the general manager," he said. His tone was measured, professional, but his eyes didn't leave Brian. "Yes, sir," the young man stammered, nearly tripping over himself as he hurried toward the back offices. The lobby was silent again, the kind of silence that made the ticking of the grand clock above the reception sound deafening. "Brian," Adrian said after a long pause, "how long have you worked here?" "5 years, sir." "5 years," Adrian repeated, nodding slightly. "5 years of serving guests, 5 years of smiling faces, and today you decided to throw water on one." The manager's voice cracked. "Sir, I made a mistake. I lost my temper." "No," Adrian interrupted, quietly but firmly. "You revealed your nature." The doors to the back office swung open. The general manager, an older man with glasses and a perfectly knotted tie, hurried forward, his face already pale. "Mr. Cole, I didn't know you were visiting today." "I wasn't," Adrian replied, his voice still low, controlled. "But I am now." The general manager looked from Adrian to Naomi, to the soaked carpet, to Brian, and the color drained from his face completely. "Oh no," he whispered. Adrian turned toward him. "I assume you know what just happened." The man nodded nervously. "Yes, sir." "I was informed." "Good," Adrian said, his voice flattening. "Then you know what comes next." Brian took a step forward. "Please, sir, don't. I have a family. I didn't mean—" Adrian looked at him again, his tone quiet but merciless. "You humiliated my wife in front of a lobby full of people. You made her dignity your toy, and now you want mercy?" Brian's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Adrian continued, his voice steady, controlled, and deadly clear. "I don't need to raise my voice to make this official. You're fired, effective immediately." The words landed like a gavel striking wood. A few guests gasped softly. The bellboy in the corner looked down at his shoes. "Security will escort you out," Adrian said simply. "And I want a written report on my desk by morning about how this hotel screens its managers." The general manager nodded quickly, almost bowing. "Yes, sir." "Of course, sir." Adrian turned to Naomi. "Let's go," he said gently this time. His hand brushed hers, a small gesture of comfort. But she didn't move. Naomi looked around the lobby, at the faces watching her, at the man who had just lost his job, at the space where her own humiliation still hung in the air like smoke. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. "Adrian, firing him won't fix this." He stopped, looked at her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she turned to Brian. "I hope you think about this," she said softly. "Not because of who I am or who my husband is, but because next time, it could be someone who doesn't have a voice loud enough to fight back." And with that, she walked toward the exit. Adrian hesitated, then followed. Behind them, the staff stood motionless, processing what they'd just witnessed, a mix of justice and shame, all tangled in one moment that would echo through the walls of that hotel for years. Outside, as the revolving doors closed behind them, the night air hit cold and clean. Naomi finally exhaled, a slow, heavy breath she'd been holding since that glass of water hit her face. Adrian looked at her. "You okay?" She nodded, but her eyes were distant. "I will be, just promise me something. Anything. Don't just fire people. Change the system that hires them." He stared at her. And for the first time that night, he had no words. The lights from the hotel reflected in the puddles on the sidewalk as they walked away, leaving behind a building that suddenly felt smaller and a silence that said everything. Words could not. The air inside the Grancrest felt heavier than before, thick with the kind of silence that lingers after something irreversible has happened. The scent of perfume and polished wood had turned sour with tension. No one spoke, not the staff still frozen behind the front desk, not the guests pretending to check their phones. Pretending not to record, Brian still stood there, eyes wide, chest rising and falling too fast. His badge, manager, glinted under the chandelier's light, a cruel irony now. He had been stripped of power, but his pride clung to him like a shadow. Adrian and Naomi were halfway to the door when the voice came. Wait, it was Brian. His tone wasn't defiant anymore, it was desperate. Adrian turned, slowly. Please, Brian said, his voice breaking. You're right. I was wrong. I didn't see her. I just saw what I wanted to see. I've been working here for years, thinking I understood people, but maybe I never did. The lobby seemed to lean in. Adrian didn't answer. Naomi stood beside him, calm but watchful. Brian took a shaky step forward. You think I'm a monster? Maybe I was for a second. But I swear, his voice cracked again, I didn't mean to hurt her. I was having a bad day. Someone yelled at me. I snapped. And she... He paused, staring at Naomi. She was just there. Naomi's eyes softened, just slightly. And that's the problem, she said quietly. I was just there, and that was enough. Brian's lips trembled. He looked at her, then at Adrian. Please, Mr. Cole. I've got 2 kids. They're in school. I can't lose this job. Adrian's jaw tightened. He wanted to say something, anything, but nothing came. For the first time that night, he felt the weight of it all. Power, justice, mercy, none of it came clean. The general manager stepped closer. Mr. Cole, if I may... Adrian raised a hand. Silence again. His voice, when he spoke, was softer. Brian, do you understand why what you did can't be undone? Brian nodded, tears forming. Yes, sir. Do you understand that it's not about your job or your kids or your bad day? It's about how you saw someone who didn't look like you and thought you could treat them differently. Brian's face crumpled. Yes, Adrian exhaled. For a long moment, the only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning. Naomi turned toward her husband. Adrian, she said softly, maybe this isn't about punishment anymore. He looked at her, eyes tired but searching. Then what is it about? She glanced at Brian. Change. Real change. The words hung in the air like a fragile truth no one wanted to touch. Adrian nodded slowly. Then after a pause, he said, You're still fired, but if you mean what you said, then maybe you'll start again somewhere and do better. Brian didn't argue. He just nodded, the tears now running freely down his face. Thank you, he whispered. Adrian turned to the general manager. Make sure HR handles this properly. And you, he looked at the gathered employees. Every one of you will attend a new training program on respect, diversity, and accountability. Starting tomorrow, a few heads nodded, some slowly, some firmly. The shift in the room was almost physical, like a weight finally being acknowledged instead of ignored. Adrian looked around the lobby one last time. The Grancrest represents excellence, he said quietly. It's time it starts meaning that for everyone. And with that, he walked toward the door. Naomi followed, her heels clicking softly against the marble, the sound echoing through the vast, tense silence. When they stepped outside, the city air felt colder, fresher, like stepping out of a storm. Cars passed, lights flickered on the wet pavement. Naomi stood still, arms folded, eyes distant. Adrian looked at her. You did that, he said. She frowned slightly. Did what? Stopped me from turning anger into something worse. She gave a small, sad smile. You stopped yourself, Adrian. I just reminded you who you are. They stood there for a long moment, neither speaking. The world moved around them, people rushing home, taxis honking, a faint drizzle starting to fall. Naomi looked up at the sky. You know, she said quietly, this won't change overnight. Adrian nodded. No, but it starts somewhere. She turned to him. Then let's make sure it starts with us. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both exhaustion and hope. He reached out, brushed a strand of wet hair from her face. The last trace of that humiliating moment now washed away by the rain. Let's go home, he said softly. As they walked away, the neon lights of the Grand Crest shimmered behind them, distorted in the rain. Inside, the staff began to move again, slowly, thoughtfully, as though something invisible had shifted within those walls. And though the world outside would never know the full story, everyone who stood in that lobby would carry it, a reminder of how power, pride, and prejudice had collided one night, and what it took to begin undoing it. The night outside the Grand Crest was still wet, the rain coming down in quiet threads that glimmered beneath the streetlights. Naomi and Adrian walked side by side without speaking for several blocks. The city was alive with its usual rhythm, tires hissing against the pavement, the occasional laugh spilling from a nearby restaurant. But to them, everything felt muted, distant. Naomi finally broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder," she said softly, "if power makes us forget the people we once were?" Adrian looked at her, rain sliding down his temple. "Sometimes," he admitted, "and sometimes it takes something ugly to remind us." They stopped under the awning of a cafe that had just closed. The faint smell of coffee and rain lingered in the air. Adrian ran a hand through his damp hair, his expression thoughtful. "I keep thinking about what you said, about changing the system, not just punishing one man." "You were right," Naomi smiled faintly, her eyes tired but warm. "I wasn't trying to be right. I just don't want this to end as another story about anger. I want it to mean something." He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the puddles at their feet. "Then it will. I'll make sure of it." Inside the hotel, word of what had happened had already begun to spread. Employees whispered in hallways. A few stood silently near the lobby, still shaken. The general manager remained behind his desk long after everyone else had gone, staring at the security footage on the screen. The moment the water splashed, the stillness that followed, the look on Naomi's face. He sighed deeply and shut off the monitor. For the first time in years, he felt ashamed of what the Grand Crest had become, a place polished on the outside but hollow within. The next morning, the hotel was unusually quiet. The staff arrived early, unsure of what to expect. A memo awaited them, short, clear, and signed by Adrian Cole himself. Effective immediately, Grand Crest Hotels will launch a comprehensive human values and ethics program. Every employee, regardless of rank, will undergo personal development training focused on empathy, communication, and equality. Let this be the day we begin again, not as a business, but as people. When Naomi read the message later that morning, she smiled, a quiet, private smile that spoke of pride more than relief. By noon, Adrian stood in his office overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered with sunlight breaking through the clouds. He thought of Brian, the fear in his eyes, the crack in his voice. And for a moment, Adrian felt something unexpected, not satisfaction, but understanding. He dialed a number, hesitated, then left a message. "Brian, it's Adrian. I wanted to say, I hope you find your footing again. Use it, learn from it. Don't waste what this could teach you." He ended the call without waiting for a reply. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the towers, Adrian and Naomi walked through the hotel lobby once more. The same marble floor gleamed beneath their steps, but it felt different now, lighter somehow. A few staff members looked up as they passed. One young woman behind the counter gave a small, nervous smile. Naomi smiled back, and for the first time, it didn't feel forced. When they reached the exit, Adrian paused. "You know," he said quietly, "for years I thought success was about perfection, flawless service, flawless image. But maybe real success is in what we fix after we break." Naomi looked at him, her eyes reflecting the warm gold of the lobby lights. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe it's in how we treat people when no one's watching." He took her hand. "Then let's build that kind of success." As they stepped outside, the last light of day stretched across the pavement, the rain finally gone. The city glowed with quiet promise, and behind them, the Grand Crest stood still, a symbol not of shame, but of change. Some stories end in silence, others end in a beginning, and this one, it felt like both.